Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 2, Frenzy, by John Allen Price. Chapter 14.
What is this place?
Asked Alvarez as the staff car finished pulling up to a group of dilapidated hangars and service buildings.
The rattiest crew of freelance cargo haulers wouldn't fly out of here.
That's what we're hoping everyone will continue to think, General Powers replied. This is a place every pilot thinks exists only in fables or tall tales. This is the Dreamworks. The mechanics working idly on the ancient turboprop freighter scarcely looked up at the Special Forces personnel emerging from the staff car. The old hangars were set far away from the much newer complex at Athena's largest military airbase. They were far enough to almost be in another district, adding to the desired desolation of the site. Powers stepped up to the side door on the first hangar, one which looked like it was about to fall off its rusted hinges, until Powers inserted an identity key and placed his hand on a scanning plate beside it. The moment he was cleared, the door snapped back into its frame and slid sideways. It remained open long enough for Powers, Hunter, Alvarez, and Taylor to enter the hangar. By the time the door closed, the staff car had driven into a nearby service building.
My God, how deep did you dig this place?
Said Hunter, moving backward a few feet when he blundered into a guardrail around the entrance and realized the hangar's true floor was several dozen feet below it.
And what did you do it for?
This is nearly 3 stories deep, said Powers, opening the gate to a steeply inclined stairway.
We dug it so we could join all 3 hangars together to facilitate moving prototype from the production complex. And then there's this.
Only when he mentioned it did his guests realize that the interior space they were viewing was far larger than the single hangar they had entered. It was over 500 feet wide and filled with prototypes of the latest capital helicopters and jet fighters. At the center line of the massive bay was the entrance to a rectangular tunnel. It was large enough for any of the aircraft in the bay to be towed through it, minus their wings or rotor blades. And hovering over the bay was an undulating floor of segmented armor plates.
This is 1/2 meter of the latest Chabum armor,
Powers continued, pointing to the roof as the party descended under it.
We decided to install it on the new center after the Mishima attack of 30 years ago leveled the original Dreamworks. If you don't mind my saying so, General, that was a bit before our time, said Hunter. I know, it seems as though all we've ever considered as history was what's contained in those whatever became of stories about old actors or music stars.
Powers grew quiet for a moment, though before Julia could respond to his observation, they reached the bottom of the stairs, and he led his guests over to a familiar-looking machine.
Now I'm sure Lieutenant Alvarez and Sergeant Taylor think they know this aircraft by heart, but they don't. This is the CFAH-4 Advanced Cutlass.
Externally, there appeared to be very few differences between the prototype of the newest Special Forces gunship and the models already in the field. Taylor quickly pointed out the more smoothly contoured nose bulges for terrain-following radar, laser designator, and infrared sensors. But it was Alvarez who noticed the shape of the rotor blades.
They're not shaped like a conventional airfoil, she said, and the tips are more sharply swept back than before. We've finally been able to use the low radar return design of the feline's wings on the rotor blades,
Powers responded.
Well, it doesn't make this version radar invisible. It's much harder to detect, especially when you use the Electronic Warfare Suite's new shrouding system. What else does it have, General? More efficient and powerful engines, and improved armor plating. In that aspect, she's now almost as good as an old grape shot. How long do my men have to familiarize themselves with it? Hunter asked, while Taylor walked up to the prototype and opened the canopy over the gunner's cockpit. You'll have only today to test fly it, said Powers. By this evening, you'll be on your way to the forward base threshold, and by early tomorrow morning, the operation will be underway. Sounds like you'll have enough time to do that test hop this morning and some more extensive flights this afternoon. Hunter turned to Alvarez and caught her just as she was enveloped by a group of military and company test pilots. The moment after she acknowledged his remarks, she was virtually surrounded and carried off by them. Well, General, I think those two can be left alone for the rest of the day. If we could recall your staff car, I think it's time we find out what the rest of my squad is doing.
You've taken the craft out of the launch position, said Ragathol, a rare touch of surprise in his voice. Why was this done?
What had almost touched the roof of the Citadel's main hangar now sat beside the transport launch pad on its landing gear. An engine service frame surrounded the tail of the Gamma-class courier. The Techrons, working on it busily, replacing the spaceship's external panels, indicating the repairs had just been finished. For a few seconds, Ragathol was frozen at the hangar's back entrance by this sight, causing Calicobol to move several feet ahead of him.
It was necessary, my master, he answered. The main engine had to be completely removed to replace the affected parts. Now it's finished, and we have to put the craft back into launch configuration. How long will it take? Asked Ragathol, carefully watching the activity of the Techron crew. I sense there are fewer workers under your command than before. Why is this so?
The courier will not be flight ready until midday tomorrow. I'm sorry, my master, but that's the best schedule we can attain with the service force we now have. Algeroth has need of all the workers he can muster. He's even been using Legionnaire units to complete the Citadel.
Yes, for once there seems to be more noise filtering down from above, instead of coming from below.
Even though the sounds in the hangar negated the more ambient background noise, Ragathol still glanced up at its roof, where he could almost see it vibrate minutely from the ceaseless heavy construction above it.
I understand Algeroth must finish his Citadel quickly. This is its most vulnerable time. But drawing Techrons away from us will only slightly increase his workforce and greatly delay us.
Will you go to his command nexus and request more Techrons released to us? Asked Calicobol.
No, that is his domain, said Ragathol, maintaining his serenity. I will not enter it unless he invites me to do so. Such is the tradition among us who command his armies. I've suffered enough delays on this task already. One more will only be a further small hindrance on my journey to Algeroth's Defiled castle.
I don't suppose they call this the Dreamworks as well? Hunter asked as he entered a much smaller facility on Athena's outskirts than the airbase. No, just the Special Forces Experimental Training Production Facility, said Powers, last to emerge from the staff car. There can be only one Dreamworks, and infantry munitions isn't exotic enough to justify it. Unlike the airbase, the Special Forces site did not occupy hundreds of acres of land beyond the sprawl of Athena. Its compound was just large enough to hold an enclosed obstacle course, a firing range, and a factory for the production of specialized munitions. Also, unlike the airbase, there was no sign at the entrance identifying what the facility was for and who ran it, even though it was well known. Powers' staff car drove up to the factory's administrative building, where his passengers were met by the site's managers and commanding officer. They were quickly escorted inside and taken to one of the production lines, where Hunter found part of his squad. "Captain, you remember the idea I had for a napalm grenade?" said Vanetti, once the greetings for Powers had ended. I remember your attempt at being a weaponsmith nearly burnt down the Roswell gunnery range," Hunter recalled. "Don't tell me they actually took your crazy ideas seriously."
"Seriously? Hell, they perfected it. They call it the Type 51. I'd like to call it the Flamer."
Vanetti held up one of the completed hand grenades from the production line behind him. It had the same apple-shaped, hard plastic shell as the other grenades used by Capital's armed forces, but the identifying stripes on it were bright yellow. When Hunter examined it, he discovered it weighed somewhat less than the standard high-explosive grenades.
"We'll use it to replace our standard white phosphorus munitions," said Powers. "In spite of its craziness, we found in field trials it's a lot less dangerous to use than phosphorus or magnesium. I remember waiting a long time for those things to burn themselves out before taking a position."
"I see we can also set the detonation time," said Hunter, paying close attention to the grenade's arming system, "so we can use it as a delayed action charge. Yes, Sergeant? What new toy do you have?"
"A new armor-piercing incendiary round," Holston offered,
holding up a belt of newly manufactured 15mm bullets.
"If we encounter any of those necromutants or razor things, these'll stop them. They're Teflon-coated, have tungsten carbide tips and phosphorus charges atop rods of hardened plastic explosive."
"These Dark Legion creatures either have body armor or very tough skin," one of the civilian managers quickly added. "These rounds should be able to punch through them and cause fatal injuries by making the plastic explosives burn explosively."
"That's great for the sniper rifles and Ted's machine gun," said Hunter, examining the heavy belt and multicolored markings on each shell, which indicated the rounds were both armor-piercing and incendiary.
"But what about those of us with assault rifles and submachine guns? You got any kind of monster-killing munitions for us?"
10mm is too small of a round for this munition design.
The manager pointed to the shells Hunter was examining, then opened a notebook he was carrying and leafed through its diagrams of the munition types the facility manufactured.
"The best we can do is this, an experimental tungsten carbide tracer round. The material in its recessed base has a high magnesium content, and it should continue burning long after it's entered the target."
"Good. I just hope they don't go melt in the breech and barrels when they're fired."
"I don't think so, at least with the latest batch,"
the manager said idly, until he noticed the shocked expressions Hunter and the members of his squad wore.
"I mean, we're really certain we worked out all the faults in the previous lot."
"You better hope so," Powers warned. "I'll not send my people into battle like this with weapons that'll get them killed because they fail." "General, how long do we have before we gotta leave?" asked Halston, accepting the belt from Hunter. "You're to depart from Athena Air Base at 5 o'clock. At max cruise, you should reach the forward base in about 2 hours. Get as much rest as you can, because you'll get very little of it tomorrow."
"Mr. Wood, Mr. Hart, welcome to the Battle Station Avenger TBM," said the station's on-duty coordinating officer. He spun around when he heard the main doors hiss open and snapped out a salute when the expected VIPs finally arrived at the center. "Thank you for allowing us in, Captain," Wood responded, shaking the officer's hand. "Can you tell us when General Brown and his staff are due in?"
"Yes, sir, if you'll follow me over to the main screen."
The captain led the civilians from the security and administrative desks near the entrance to the center's curved wall of display screens. On the largest screen was a tactical map of the district controlled by the battle station and the hostile territories several miles beyond the frontier. When the captain whispered an order to one of the console operators, 2 of the many aircraft symbols flying inside the district airspace were surrounded by glowing rings. Beside them were displayed their speed, altitude, heading, and estimated time of arrival. "General Brown's ship will arrive in the next 15 minutes, said the captain. "General Powers left Athena later. His ETA is about an hour and a half." Sounds like Vernon was briefing his squad a little bit more extensively than he expected, said Wood, reading off the more distant aircraft's data block.
"And I still can't believe one of them is Hunter's squad,"
Hart commented.
a resigned tone in his voice. "And they've been assigned the most important objective in the entire operation?"
"It's also the most impossible objective. They're going to have to penetrate deep inside the Citadel, a complex we know nothing about, and locate one human being in its teeming population. The only thing that'll help us locate her is she's as valuable to the Dark Legion as she is to us."
"I'm certain one of the other squads we've assigned to the Pathfinder Force could do just as well, Mr. Wood."
"They'd have to be briefed on the woman," said Wood, his temper growing short. "Between what Hunter's squad dug up on their own and the information we've given them, they know her more intimately than anyone else on this planet. No, Mr. Hart, there isn't enough time to brief anyone else on the woman, and I'll not change the assignment. You've had your input on the matter, and the decisions have been made accordingly. Captain, can you show us how the aircraft assigned to the operation are marshalling?"
"Hey, Sergeant, listen. I think it's another one."
The private's warning caused only a few of the enlisted men on the exercise field to stop their work and scan the sky. In the afternoon's waning hours, there was still enough light outside for them to work by, and the heat that had built up over the day made even the air-conditioned barracks at the forward base too stifling to stay in. Those who did look up caught sight of a rare, though suddenly familiar, helicopter entering the base's traffic pattern. Its shark-like silhouette was immediately recognizable, as was the muted growl of its turbines. For a few seconds, it was in clear view, then disappeared behind the palm trees, and the soldiers went back to cleaning and reassembling their weapons. "You're right, son. It's another Special Forces Cutlass," Sergeant Bob Watts answered, more concerned with finishing the reassembly of his M606 machine gun.
"Don't you think it's odd that we hardly see one of those things for months?"
said the private.
"Yet in the last 12 hours, we've seen 4.
"Kid's got a point, Big Bob," a corporal added.
"With all the activity that's been happening around here, I say something big is up."
"Yeah, some fancy Special Forces show, I'll bet," said Watts, smiling as he finally got the action on his M606 to function smoothly. "When they blow it, the brass will have to send us regulars in to rescue them."
"Who do you think the enemy is?" the private asked. "Mishima or the Dark Legion?"
"I'll believe in those little green aliens when I see them. I prefer Mishima. Slants are just as good to kill as anyone else."
"You really hate him, don't you, Sergeant? Is there anyone else you hate more?"
"Don't get Big Bob started," warned the corporal, grinning mischievously. "You show him the right officer, and he'll deck him for you right here."
"Is that true?"
asked the private.
"Why don't you like our officers?"
"Because they made me one once," said Watts, growing irritated. "But I soon fixed that. What I really hate are those map watchers in the battle stations. The only time they come to the frontier is with an armed escort."
"Is there any officer you like?"
"Well, the lieutenant we got ain't too bad. And there was this Special Forces captain I heard about. I like what I heard, until yesterday's news. Security arrested him at the Atlantis spaceport. It seems as though you can't even trust a hero these days. Enough questions, kid. Let's see what the menu has for supper." Mutant Chronicles, Fiction. The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 2, Frenzy, by John Allen Price. Chapter 14. End.